Welcome back to my channel. I'm Jhonna, and this is Jhonna Unfiltered. We're continuing the series on MBTI types as narcissistic parents, and today's type is one that operates in a very different way from most of the types we've covered so far. Because the ones we've discussed before, the dramatic types, the guilt-heavy types, the image-obsessed types, they're all relatively visible in how they affect their children. Today's type isn't visible in the same way. We're looking at ISTP, also known as the virtuoso type. And the most defining thing about this version of narcissistic parenting is what's absent, not what's present. Before I get into it, the usual disclaimer. I'm not a psychologist or a therapist. Nothing here is a clinical diagnosis. This is my learning diary, based on research and patterns. Most ISTPs are not narcissists. They're often practical, calm, genuinely capable people who are good at staying grounded in difficult situations. But when narcissistic patterns layer onto the ISTP style, what you get is a parent whose most damaging quality is emotional absence. Not cruelty, not obvious control, just not being there in the way the child actually needs, and treating that absence as completely reasonable. Let me start with what ISTP actually means. ISTP stands for introverted, sensing, thinking, and perceiving. People of this type are typically described as independent, practical, and action-oriented. They're the ones who figure out how things work, who can fix a problem without making a big production of it, who stay calm when everyone else is falling apart. They value freedom and tend to dislike being controlled or obligated. A healthy ISTP parent can be genuinely excellent in certain ways. They teach their children real skills. They model calm under pressure. They don't helicopter or smother. They give the child room to figure things out on their own, which can produce genuinely resilient and capable kids. But when narcissistic patterns overlay those same qualities, the independence becomes emotional unavailability. The calm becomes coldness. The freedom they value for themselves gets applied to the child in ways that feel like abandonment. And the practical competence that they take pride in becomes a standard that the child is expected to meet before they can earn any kind of acknowledgement. Let me explain the core pattern. The ISTP narcissistic parent doesn't control through guilt or through loud authority. They control through detachment, through a kind of quiet withdrawal that communicates, without words, that emotional needs are inconvenient and that the child should be able to handle themselves. They're not necessarily mean. They're not necessarily present either. They exist in the household as a practical provider, as someone who fixes things and keeps the structure functioning. But emotionally, the child often feels like they're living with a very capable roommate who tolerates their presence rather than a parent who's genuinely invested in who they're becoming. This type of narcissistic parent tends to view emotions, their own and especially other people's, as a kind of inefficiency, a problem to be solved or ignored, not an experience to be acknowledged. So when the child is upset, the response isn't comfort. It's either practical advice for how to stop being upset or a visible withdrawal that communicates this isn't something worth engaging with. And the child learns, over many repetitions of that response, that their emotional experience is not welcome here, that they should manage it alone, silently, and ideally not let it show. Let me talk about the mother and father versions separately. The ISTP narcissistic mother tends to be unpredictable in a specific way. She can be genuinely fun and engaged in certain moments, particularly when there's something practical or active happening that she finds interesting. She might be great at certain kinds of activities, teaching a skill, working on something together, navigating a physical challenge. In those moments, she's present and even enjoyable to be around. But when the context requires emotional attunement, when the child needs to be comforted, when they're struggling with something they can't fix through action, she becomes noticeably absent. Not dramatically, just unavailable. Like she shut a door that doesn't have a handle on the inside. She also tends to frame her approach as producing independence in the child. She'll say things like, "You need to learn to handle this yourself," or "I didn't raise you to be weak." And there's a way that sounds reasonable, even admirable, until you look at it from the child's perspective. The child isn't being taught independence. They're being told that their needs are unwelcome. And those are very different things. When the child does something impressive, something that demonstrates real skill or capability, the mother may acknowledge it in a way that's brief and functional. Okay, good. Or, see, you can do it. But there's rarely real warmth in it. It's more like a system confirming that the input produced the expected output. And the child, who wanted to feel genuinely celebrated, instead just feels that they met the minimum requirement. The ISTP narcissistic father is often the type that children describe as a mystery. He was there. He provided. The lights were on and there was food. He might have taught them practical things. But they genuinely don't know what he thinks about them as a person, what he feels toward them, whether he's proud of them in any real sense. Because he never said. And the absence of that communication isn't neutral. It leaves the child with a persistent uncertainty about their own worth that they carry for years. He tends to express any form of care through doing things, not saying things. He fixes your car. He shows you how something works. He handles the practical problems. And those acts are real forms of care. But they can't fully substitute for the emotional acknowledgement that a child needs to develop a stable sense of self. The child knows their father is capable. They're not sure they're loved. Conflict with this type of father tends to be handled through cold withdrawal rather than direct confrontation. When the child does something wrong or disappointing, the response is often silence. A dropping of the temperature. A period of emotional unavailability that can last days without explanation. And the child doesn't always know what they did or how to repair it because the father doesn't explain. He just waits for the child to figure it out or move on, while the child is quietly desperate to understand what happened. Let me look at how financial situation shapes this dynamic. A wealthy ISTP narcissistic parent provides material stability and, sometimes, even generosity. There are resources available, but those resources don't come with emotional investment. The parent provides, but they don't connect. And the child grows up in a comfortable environment that is emotionally hollow. They might have everything they need materially and still feel profoundly alone. A financially struggling ISTP narcissistic parent uses the practical burden of survival as a reason to justify emotional absence. Everything is about making ends meet. There's no time or energy for emotional conversations. And the child absorbs the message that their needs are an additional burden in an already strained situation. They learn to be very small, very quiet, and very self-sufficient. Not because that's healthy development, but because it's the only option they were given. When substance dependence is involved with this type, the unpredictability that was already present in their engagement becomes much more extreme. The ISTP, who is normally calm and functionally detached, becomes something harder to predict. The child, who had learned to exist quietly around this parent, now has to navigate something far less stable. And the strategies they developed for managing the sober version of the parent don't work the same way anymore. Let me talk about what children of this type of parent tend to carry into adulthood. They're often very self-reliant. They learned early that help wasn't reliably available, so they figured out how to manage on their own. That capability is real, and it serves them well in many areas of life. They handle problems. They don't fall apart easily. They're often quite functional even under significant stress. But they also often have genuine difficulty asking for help. Not because they don't know how to do so practically, but because asking for help triggers something deeper. A belief that needing something is a sign of weakness. That being emotionally dependent on someone is a burden on them. That the right way to handle difficulty is alone, quietly, without making it anyone else's problem. They frequently struggle with vulnerability in intimate relationships. Because they learned that showing emotional need made them a target for dismissal or withdrawal, they developed the habit of keeping their inner world very private. In adult relationships, this can create a significant wall between them and the people who want to be close to them. They want connection genuinely, but letting someone see them struggling doesn't feel safe in the way that it should. Many children of ISTP narcissistic parents also carry a specific uncertainty about whether they're actually likable as people, separate from what they can do. Because the acknowledgement they received growing up was almost entirely tied to competence and capability. They were noticed when they performed. They were invisible when they just existed. And they've never been entirely sure what they're worth when they're not producing something impressive. Before I close, I want to say something clearly. If you grew up in a home that felt functional on the surface but emotionally empty underneath, where you were taken care of in practical ways but never really seen as a person, that experience was real. The practical care was real. The emotional absence was also real. Both happened. And acknowledging the absence isn't ingratitude for what was provided. It's honesty about what was missing. Before I go, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had a parent in your life who is genuinely capable and practical but emotionally unavailable? And how did that shape the way you relate to your own emotional needs as an adult? Drop it in the comments if you'd like to share. This is one of the less talked about versions of difficult parenting, and I think a lot of people who experienced it have never quite found words for what it felt like. Thanks for watching. If this video resonated with you, please consider hitting the subscribe button. I want to be upfront and share that I use this text-to-speech voice to tell my stories because as a full-time ESL teacher, I have to be very careful with my vocal cords. Managing vocal nodules means I have to save my voice for my students, but I didn't want that to stop me from sharing these unfiltered thoughts with you. I'm Jhonna, and I'm currently working toward my goal of 1,000 subscribers so I can finally monetize this channel and turn this passion into a sustainable part of my future. This is my diary of solo living here in the Philippines, and your support, whether through a comment or a sub, helps me keep this channel growing. If you would like to help out even more, you can check out the buy a treat for my pets link in the description. My dogs definitely appreciate the love. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next update. Thank you for being such an important part of this journey. I'm Jhonna, and I will see you in the next one.